Hello and welcome to TransForm Tuesday for Tuesday, January 21st, 2020. My name is Dave McCormick. I'm VP of Products and Services here at Alpha Software. And today we're going to be doing actually a review from last week because last week we had some technical issues with the audio. And I thought that would be corrected even in the recording, but it wasn't. And I didn't want you guys to miss out on this because I know it's an important topic. It has to do with reporting. So before we get started this week, can I just make sure that everyone can hear me, that the audio is coming through loud and clear, or if it's coming through choppy, please let me know that as well. Maybe there's something I can do on this end. So if you could just type something in the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel and let me know how the audio is going, that would be awesome. Good. All right, excellent. It's coming through clear this time. Fantastic. Now, I don't think I'm sharing my screen. Maybe I am. Let me take a look. Nope, not yet. And so now you should see my screen as well. Fantastic. Also joining me today is Sarah Mitchell, who could answer your questions if you type them into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. Sarah is without a voice today due to a cold or flu, so she can't talk, but she can definitely answer questions that way as well. So today we're going to talk about reporting, and I had covered this a while ago. Let me jump way down here. Where are we today? I think slide 260 will do it. 258. We're going to talk a little bit about reporting, and we're going to talk again about a sample application that I've been putting together called the Alpha Field Services application. Now, the Alpha Field Services application I'm going to get into in a minute. But I just want to talk a little bit about, actually, let's get into it right now. So let me just pop over here to Safari, and I've got a copy of this Alpha Field Services application or solution running. Now, Alpha Field Service Solution is an application that's built using Alpha Anywhere, and it works with Alpha TransForm. That's the TransForm connection for today's TransForm Tuesday. TransForm forms the front end of the system, and it's used for a field services organization. In this case, the sample data that we created was sample data for a fictional HVAC company. So company that fixes furnaces and air conditioning and other things like that, climate control systems. And we have thousands of records that have been put into TransForm for people out in the field where they've collected information about broken furnaces and what parts needed to be replaced and what time they showed up and a whole bunch of other information that gets collected and stored in the system. And it all gets actually kept not only in the TransForm back end, but also in a separate database. I'm going to explain right now why we do that. If you take a look here, here's a dashboard. And this dashboard is showing off some key performance indicators from the data, from our TransForm data. In particular, these are keeping track of how many times or how many of the tickets that were assigned were closed on that same day. There's a term for that in the field services industry called first time to fix. In other words, did the field services person go out and fix it without having to return, another time, maybe for a part or for some more information or something like that? How often did they actually get that done? Now we could pull that information. So we have all that information here. This displays it for the last. There should be some. We're going to fix this, but there are going to be some months under here. Here you can take a look. This is from December of 2019. Here we're getting into January of 2020, and this one shows you the ticket completion rate as it stands for today. This one shows you over the last couple of weeks. This shows you how many tickets are still open today, how many are pending review, how many are closed. And this all comes from the database. This is all data driven. So there are a couple ways we could have done this. And one is we could have pulled the data directly from the API, using the API as a data source. But for dashboards and for reporting, I find that it's actually much better to first take that data and put it into an intermediate storage space. And what I use is MariaDB, but any SQL database would work just fine for this. So of the two methods, method one being do your reporting right from Alpha TransForm, you can do that. I'm going to show you how to do that in a minute. But the method that I really prefer to use is method two, using extracted data as the data source. So let's first show you method one quickly, and then I'm going to dive into method two just a little bit more. So with method one, if you're in Alpha Anywhere, and I'm pretty sure everyone on this call is familiar with Alpha Anywhere, but if you're not, Alpha Anywhere is sort of a companion product to TransForm. It is our system, our low-code system for building web and mobile business applications. So unlike TransForm, which is used for basically building mobile forms or even mobile applications, because you can give them a fair amount of intelligence, TransForm is not used for building web dashboards or reports or anything like that. It's fairly limited in terms of what it was designed to do, whereas Alpha Anywhere is more of a general purpose tool. So we're going to use it here today to sort of build out our TransForm solution. So if you go into Alpha Anywhere and you create a new report, what you're going to see is you're going to see the first dialog box that appears is going to ask you where you would like the information to come from for your report. And here you have some options, one of which is SQL data source, and later on that's what I'm going to be showing you how to build with. But one that you can choose is TransForm. And if you select TransForm as your option, another dialog box appears, and it asks you for two pieces of information. The first is your API key, which if you're familiar with TransForm, you can get right here at the Alpha TransForm Home tab. In the Home tab, if you go under Development Options and you choose Get API Key, you can choose the key for that. Now keys, API keys have all different permissions. You can and you can set that. I've created here a read-only key by clicking on the read-only option before I clicked the Get API key. And so it's given me a read-only API key. I tend to only, or I'd prefer to only use API keys with the minimum number of functionality in case that API key gets somehow loose in the wild and I don't close it down. I don't want people adding to my database or making changes or anything. Reading it is bad enough. The other nice thing about API keys, though, of course, is, for example, I'm showing this one live on my screen, but I've shown it before, this one. And at the end of this session, I can actually go and revoke that API key and create a new one later on. So it just gives you a layer of security. Anyway, once I grab my API key, I can go back into Alpha TransForm and enter in that key, which I did here. Oops, which I did here. And I enter in the form ID. That is the name of the form that I've created in TransForm. So where do I want to pull the data from? And once I have those two pieces of information, Alpha Anywhere goes and makes a call to the TransForm backend, and it brings back a list of all of the fields that are in that form. So I have things like company name, contact name, city, state, zip, GPS location, how they answered to the answers to particular checklist questions, and some other information as well. And then what I can do is I can use the Alpha Anywhere banded report writer, and I could just simply lay out those fields right in the report writer. And we're going to get into the report writer in just a moment. So that's sort of the gist of it. And here's an example of one of the results here. So if I built a report and I included basically the service date and the name of the customer, and I put those into the detail section of my report, when the report is generated, for each record that it gets pulled back from TransForm, another line is added to that detail section, and the result looks something like that. Today's report is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be a little bit more involved, and I'm going to jump over to it and show it to you right now. So I'm going to pop over here to Alpha Anywhere, and here is a report of service calls. And so I'm going to go ahead and preview this report. So let me show you the final result, and we'll work backwards from there. So in this result, in this report, I was interested for each one of my service technicians, and I have them listed here by email rather than name. I'm going to clean that up a little bit later on, but I have them listed by email. We take a look for the week and we see how many tickets were assigned to that particular technician, how many were closed, and based on that, we can calculate a close rate. So B. Clark at alphasoftware.com, for example, was assigned 15 tickets, and he or she closed all 15 tickets with a 100% bill rate. Now, billable hours comes from the information that was recorded in TransForm based on when do they show up to a particular assignment and how long were they there and how much of that is billable. And then the last one we have is the utilization rate. Each of these can take up to, I think I have it set to 20, you can assign up to 20 tickets per week for the different engineers, and their utilization rate is how many they've done. So for example, if they only got 11 tickets or 12 tickets assigned, they only had a utilization rate of around 60%. Now, there's some other metrics that people are often interested as well in the field services industry, one of which, a big one, is called attachment rate. Attachment rate is when a service person goes in and finds something else that can be done, maybe a new part that can be replaced or some sort of add-on sale, and that's called the attachment rate, were they able to actually generate a little bit more service income while they were out on the call. And I'm actually going to add a column for that in a future iteration of this report. So how do you build a report like this? That's what we're going to cover today. And in future sessions, I'm going to show you how you call a report like this from within a web application and how you can display it on the screen and how you can export that data into an Excel spreadsheet. But today it'll be good enough, I think, for us just to cover how you go about building a report like this. So here I am in Alpha Anywhere. And in Alpha Anywhere, let me move the screen over a little bit. I'm going to go over, I built this actually using the regular control panel. And let me tell you a little bit about the control panel and how it's different than the web projects control panel. In Alpha Anywhere was classically a desktop database to begin with. So when all applications in Alpha Anywhere, which was previously called Alpha 5, used to run just on Windows. They weren't even web applications, or certainly not mobile applications. And we had the notion of called the control panel. The control panel is where you would design your different, the tables in which you were going to keep the information, data entry forms, but again, Windows-based data entry forms, and reports was another one. It turns out the reporting feature is also used today in web applications, and you can get to that directly from the web projects control panel. So I'm going to go here into the web projects control panel and show you that. In the web projects control panel for our project, if you choose reports and then you say you want to create a new one, it's going to ask you, it's going to give you a couple of questions like I'd shown you before. So I'm going to say create a new report. And here I've got 3 different sources I can pull that from. I can pull it from a SQL data source, which is what I'm going to do, or I could pull it from TransForm, which is what I showed you just a moment ago, that thing with the API key. Now, if I pull it from a SQL data source, I just simply choose my connection string. This is something that I had set up earlier, and I'm going to show you more about connection strings in a moment. And that connection string is making a connection to my MariaDB database. And I'm going to click next. And now I have a collection of tables in there. So let's say I wanted to do it based on service calls. And let's say I wanted to choose all of the columns so they were available for me when I was designing the report. Now at this point, I can just click finish, and it's going to ask me an important question, and that is, how many records do I want to use when I create this report? That's an important question because I think I have something like 10,000 records or something in this table. And if I pull down all 10,000 records, it's going to make the system really very slow while it tries to keep them all in memory. So you really only need a subset of it typically when you're building a report. So maybe I'll say 300 records is good enough. So I'm going to click OK. And this should turn into an hourglass or a little whirly thing in a moment. And what's going to happen in a minute is I should get a dialog box, and I should have a new, not a dialog box, I should see the report editor appear here. We'll just give this a minute to load, because right now it's making a call and pulling down all of those records. So that was 300 records. And if you imagine if I had more records than that, it could take quite a while. And that's one of the reasons that you have to consider data lag when you're putting together your reports. So here's a blank report, and I have different sections in the report. Here's the header part that appears, of course, at the top, and the footer, which appears at the bottom. And here's the detail section. If you recall, that's the section that repeats over and over again for each one of your records. Now, within the detail section, you can also create what are called groups, and that's what I did back in my report here. If you recall, what I've done is I've created a group. Just put this in print preview so you can take a look at it. And I grouped everything by week. So I just wanted to know what the weeks were. And then within week, I grouped everything by the technician. So in my example here, I have a group called week, which I created, and a group called technician, which I created as well. Now the report editor is a little bit too complicated for me to show you all in one go, but we do have some good documentation available for it. And actually, Sarah, can I ask you if you can find the report writer documentation to go ahead and put that in the chat window? That would be awesome. So this is what we've got right here. So now that I've got all these in place, basically creating one of these table layout reports is similar to kind of working with a spreadsheet in that these columns, they actually go all the way down through each one of the rows. And I can subdivide them the same way that you can split up cells. So I could say I'd like to add a new column. And if I added a new column, you'll see it and inserted a new cell all the way down here as well. And that keeps everything nice and lined up. Now within each one of these boxes, I can choose what I want to put into it. So in this case, I can double click and I can choose a field. In this case, it shows me all the fields that are in my database. I could put a field in, or I could put in an expression, which is what I did when I figured out the close rate. Let me just show you the close rate. Oops, that's the label for close rate, not the close rate itself. So for example, this here's a calculation one where we've taken the billable time and we've divided by 60 to give us the number of hours, since the figure was already in minutes and we wanted it to display in hours. So creating a report is basically setting up a data source and then using that data source, breaking it up into groups, grouping it as you like, and then basically laying out fields into each one of these sections. And that's it. If you haven't played with the report writer before, it's definitely worth getting into. It's a very, very powerful tool. Let me tell you one other thing about the report writer while I'm here, is when you're creating reports, I've found, and I may change my mind about this, but what I've found is that I prefer sometimes working while I'm testing ideas for a report, actually back here in this old-fashioned control panel I was telling you about a moment ago. And what I do is I actually bring all of the data down locally into a database on my computer. And I do that using what's called a passive link table. A passive link table is basically a copy of a SQL table that came from a database that lives here on your hard drive so that you can access it quickly and start playing with the data. So to set up an active link table, you need two things. First, you need a connection string, and I'm going to show you how to do that. To do a connection string, let me just go here. You start over in Tools, and you go to External Databases, and you do create a alpha DAO connection strings. And I've already created one called Field Service CN, but I could have also created a new one. You'll be creating a new one. And let's just call this test connection. Then I click the build button and I tell it what kind of database I would like to talk to. The nice thing about Alpha is you have a million choices. These are all database drivers that come included with Alpha Anywhere. The one in particular I was interested in was MariaDB. And so then when I was in MariaDB, I just needed to put in the domain or the IP address where my database was located, my username, and my password. And when I was all done, I clicked OK, and I ended up with a connection string. And here's my connection string right here. So if I go ahead and open this connection string, let's edit this. I'm going to build, and I click test connection. It says, yep, I was able to connect to your MariaDB database at port 3306 using this username and password and using this host name. As you can see, I'm using an RDS instance. That's a Amazon online instance, a cloud instance of the database. All right, so with my connection string built, the next thing I would do is I would go and I would say new, and I'd say passive link table. And it asks me, do I want to create one or do I want to create multiple? I'm going to just create one. And now I need my connection string name. That was the thing we just built, so I'm going to choose that. And then from my list of tables, the table I'm interested in is called service calls. So I'm going to choose that. And again, I could choose all fields, or I could just click on the fields in particular that I was interested in. And then lastly, I have to give this a name. I'm just going to call this test for now. And once I do it, if you take a look here at the bottom where my mouse is, it says copying records. That's because right now it's actually making a connection to the database and bringing down all of those records. And this takes a while, but the nice thing is you only have to do it the one time when you're designing the report. In the future, the report will go against a database that's already been cached. And while you're designing it, you'll be going against a database that's already cached. So this is a nice way if you still want to work with a lot of records while you're creating your report, is to do it as a passive link table. Now this might take too long for us during our demo here. I forgot how long it took to copy down those records. So I'm going to go ahead and kill Alpha Anywhere and stop it. Save, oops, is it still, oh, is it really going? Save changes, no. And now I'm going to open Alpha Anywhere again. And I'm going to pop back into this project. While that's going on, are there any questions that anyone would like answered? You can go ahead and type them into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. All right. This takes a while to load when I've got it, when I have when I'm streaming, I've noticed. All right, I'm going to go over to workspaces and tasks and choose my database again. Okay, so back to passive link tables, back at the control panel. I've previously created this service called passive linked table before the webinar started, and I'm going to double click on it and just show you that it's full of data. So this has the call times, the name of the customer that was called on, the address, what complaint they said, for example, the heat wasn't working or the air conditioning isn't working or whatever. It has other fields in here as well, what time the tech showed up and all that. And the way I built this database was by writing an Alpha Anywhere script to extract, transfer, and load the data into another database. And I've covered that actually in a different session. And again, the reason why we will make a copy of it rather than going directly against the Alpha Anywhere API is that the performance is going to be significantly better against a SQL database than against a TransForm API. And that's just sort of, if you think about it, a little bit of common sense, because the API has to also make a call against a database in the back and then take that information and deliver it through the API on the other side. So this sort of cuts out the middleman. It makes for a better presentation. So I built that report, my first time fix report, and I'm previewing that here, and that goes against that FS context table. But when I'm actually really ready to create it for real, and this is just a test, I do in fact want to build it over here at the Web Projects control panel like I showed you before, and I want to have it go against the full database. So I've given you, hopefully I haven't confused you too badly, but I just wanted to give you an introduction to the whole idea of bringing your data from TransForm down into a different system, down into a SQL database, and then using that SQL database or a copy of that SQL database called a passive linked table in order to create reports. Now the reports, this is all fine. You're taking a look at it here in a Windows environment, but in the future episodes, what I want to do is I want to show you how you can actually call it from and set it up so that it can be called from within your web application. And we're going to do it against this Alpha Field Services application. The last thing I want to leave you with before we go today is that this Alpha Field Service application is going to be free of charge. So obviously nothing is free of charge, because in order to use it, you need Alpha Anywhere and a TransForm account. But I'm going to be giving away this and giving people access to the GitHub project so that they will be able to put together their own backends and basically use this as a framework going forward. Let's see, any questions? Yes, here's a question. Can you create a FreeForm report using the report writer? Yes, you absolutely can. So this FreeForm report, when I create, and let me tell you what the difference is, because that brings up a great point. So when I'm here in reports and I say new, and I say that I want to create a report, you'll notice there are these two other things. One's called a letter and one's called a label. Labels are, you probably won't want to use letters, but labels are interesting because they have a whole bunch of predefined standard label sizes that you can lay out and get your data to print on. So if you can imagine, for example, that in this application, we might want to print out QR code stickers that we can affix to pieces of equipment so that next time we go and service that equipment, we can just do a scan of that QR code. But anyway, back to create new reports. I'm going to choose create new report. And here I could choose the data source. I showed you that. But down here, I have a couple of options. I can use what's called a quick report, which I'm not going to get into. But I can choose a blank FreeForm report or a blank table layout report. A FreeForm report is interesting because it gives you a lot more control over what the appearance of the report is when it's done. I'm going to click it, and you're going to see that it looks, let's just choose our contacts table for this one. Finish, and we'll have it pull in, I don't know, 300 records. All right, so there aren't that many fields there. Okay, so here is our, here's a layout report, and you'll have a different set of tools. So you have the ability to draw boxes and add graphics and do some other things in a FreeForm report that you can't as easily do in a layout table report. But the reason I use the layout table report, that's the one which looks like this but has those boxes that you click on to insert the fields, and all of the columns line up all across the board. Here you could do all kinds of stuff. You could have some random stuff over here that had nothing to do with the detail section. And you can do some other interesting things. You can put reports inside reports and a few other neat things. This style report was the original one to Alpha Anywhere, this sort of the classic report writer. The reason I don't like to use it as much as the other kind is that for doing web output, it doesn't always come out the way that you designed it. Sometimes the alignment is a little bit off because there's some, it needs to sort of translate itself to something that works for the web. The other thing is it doesn't make a particularly faithful reproduction when you're going to export it to an Excel spreadsheet. So the reason we went with the table layout report, even though it seems a little bit more restrictive because you're sort of building everything into a table, is that the fidelity is really fantastic when it comes to printing out Excel sheets and HTML, and even PDF, I think, turns out better that way as well. So I tend to use the newer report style. It takes a little bit of getting used to if you're used to the old one, but it doesn't take that long. So I would highly recommend using layout table over FreeForm. But to answer your question, yes, you can still use the FreeForm report writer. Are there any other questions? That looks like it. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining me. I really appreciate it. If you do have any TransForm questions, go ahead and send them to tfservice@alphasoftware.com. Thanks very much, Sarah, for joining us today. Oh, and by the way, before I close this window down, for those of you who don't have the links yet for how to use the report writer, Sarah has pasted them into the chat window of the GoToWebinar control panel. So go ahead and click on those so that you have them. I'll give you a minute. The rest of you, thank you very much and hope to see you next Tuesday. Take care and goodbye.